The idea is that most of us walk through our lives asleep, ignorant of both our experience of living and the meaning behind life. And the vipassana, or mindfulness, is a form of helping us touch that idea in a different manner based on what the Buddha teachings were. It's a very simplified approach to what the Buddha tried to share through his teachings. So let's just get a little bit of a clarity on his life that will help us, and then we'll look at the more Western approaches since we're using the word mindfulness. Is this interesting to you all?
Something new to learn.
Sorry?
Something new to learn.
Something new to learn. So Siddhartha Gautama was born in North India, in Ayodhya, and he was born to a king. And when he was born, the king wanted to know, based on Vedic astrology, which kind of looks at the stars and the relationship between the stars and the influence, much like our horoscope today, what would be the life of his child? What was the direction of his life? And the Vedic astrologers told him, look, your son has a very incredible set of stars, and he's either going to be a great king, or he's going to be a world spiritual leader. You can ask yourself, what would you like for your child? But the father of this child did not want his son to be a world spiritual leader, wanted him to be a king, and so he did his best to contain the experience of his son's life by keeping him in the palace, making his life very lavish. He was married at the age of 21 to a beautiful princess. They have a beautiful child, and by the time he's 26, he's not really seen much of the outside world. At the age of 26, an old woman comes to the palace. He sees her walking to the palace. He goes to his servant and he asks, why does she seem to be different? And his servant's like, she's old. And kind of it's the first time that the Buddha had, or Siddhartha has a conception on a different dilemma of experience of life. And so he asks his servant, well, why does it happen? And the servant's like, man, like life. And so the Buddha realized there's a bigger world out beyond. And so at the end of that night, the Buddha chooses to dress in plain clothing and will walk outside of the palace with his servant and walk along the path toward the city. As they walk along the path, they first see a beggar, someone with no money. And the Buddha asks his servant, well, what's wrong with this person? And the Buddha pointed out, well, some people have no money. Some people are poor. And they continue walking. He sees a leper. And he asks, wow, what's wrong with this person? He's like, well, he's sick. He's got leprosy. And the Buddha's like, oh, recognizing that human experience has many layers of difficulties. And then he would see a dead body on the road. And he asks, whoa. And the servant's like, dude, we die. One day we die. Suddenly the Buddha realized, Siddhartha Gautama realizes that there's a lot of suffering in the world. And he asks his servant, why is there so much suffering? And the servant did not have an answer for him. He's like, if you want an answer, perhaps you can go sit with the yogis who are practicing in their own community out there. They sometimes ask these questions. And so the Buddha comes back home and he leaves his wife, he leaves his child, he leaves the palace behind, and he goes and he joins this community of yogis. It is said that after 7 years with the community, the Buddha became the biggest and the best yoga master, doing incredible feats and features. However, for him, the question that he started with, why is there suffering, was not answered. And so he leaves the yoga community. He loses his disciples. 3 of his disciples will walk behind him, kind of watching him. And the Buddha would spend the next 5 and 6 years going between choosing to experience the lavishness of life, food, richness, parties, if you want to think of it that way. And then he would spend the next latter half in extreme impoverishment. If you go throughout Asia, you will see statues of the Buddha in this period of not eating for almost a year, extremely just bones and skins. It is in this period where he's almost bones and skins that one day he reaches a well, he's thirsty, and he's unable to pull the bucket of water because he's too weak. He just sits by the well, and a young girl comes with her herd of sheep, and she sees this beggar-looking individual, and she gets water for her sheep, she feeds her flock, but then she leaves some water for the man. She doesn't expect anything in return, she doesn't ask anything in return, she just does something because she could notice that he was in dilemma. The Buddha drinks the water, and then he goes to sit under a tree. This is the Bodh Gaya tree in Nepal today, it used to be part of India. And he sits under a tree and he sits for 3 days. And it is said that after those 3 days he comes out with his own epiphany, his own awareness. The disciples that he has would see him and realize that he looks different. There's a different perception around him. They're going to come and sit with him after just spending 5 years in the background looking at him. When he sees them, he will begin and give his first lecture, which is a basis of where we're coming from. And the basis would be suffering is part of existence. However, we are the one causing it. And the way to not cause suffering is to learn how to feel yourself and do something for other people. That is the main aspects of Buddhism. It has a variety of different branches and different aspects, but that is the core of Buddhism. Do something for other people without the need to get something back, without the need for acknowledgement. Not since we're not dealing with Buddhism, but we need this space. But the first thing was not about just going out and giving. The first thing was, we cause the suffering. We are the one who are responsible for the suffering. We make it. And we're not even aware of it. And so the first element is to feel. To feel, to be present with ourselves, and to accept what is happening. These two principles, learning to feel yourself and accept whatever is happening, is the core and what Vipassana is.
Can I comment something?
Please.
Actually, every people do not understand that, but every feeling has a hormone. Giving has a hormone, happiness has a hormone, sadness has a hormone, and giving is the highest hormone, and this and giving pleasure. And our religion and nature is based on giving. So I support you that giving is very key to give you happiness, feeling happiness, especially if the giving for no reason.
Correct.
Once you give for reason, stop giving. It's not. It's out of the scope. Go ahead, sorry.
No, that was perfect, exactly. Meaning giving without any need to get something back is the highest way of feeling good about yourself. If you ever feel negative about yourself, go out and do something. Go hang out, and again, in the Western cultures that we have, go and be in a food kitchen. Go out there and try to give food to those who don't have it. Right? That we do in different holidays, whether you're Christian in Christmas, whether in a Ramadan, whether in Israel tradition in Passover and other holidays. So are we mindful? Are we just full of mind, or are we really mindful? Right? So the Western word translation for Vipassana, this idea of learning to feel oneself, is the word mindfulness. And we'll see how the Western side kind of took that and developed into a little bit more of a modern practice per se. And today it's one of the very leading type of desires within the corporate environment of people to use much like yoga started back 25 years ago, and so kind of shifted a bit. For me, the word yoga and the word mindfulness have the same connotation. I remember in 2002 when I was invited to go to a resort in Arizona and be their mindfulness assistant manager. This resort is called Miraval. The Miraval Resort is the only resort in the world that functions on the basis of mindfulness. Everything in this resort is grounded on the ideas of mindfulness. And when I met them and they told me, oh, mindfulness is this ability to feel oneself and accept, I remember it's like, oh, you're just using another word for yoga. You're just changing vocabulary. And so yes, vocabulary, as we learned this week, is very powerful. And for me, mindfulness is just another vocabulary word to creating a space of learning how to be mindful, learning how to be aware, how to be present, how to take your time to really notice what's going on around you. How many of you walk through your day and come home at night and not really remember what you saw? Or worse, how many of you have the experience that on your day off you get into your car and about 10 minutes later you're realizing you're driving to work when you were trying to drive to the beach on the other side? Right? Anyone had that experience happen to them? Right? Because we are not necessarily present, we're not necessarily aware, we're not necessarily here. I very much enjoyed the way the vocabulary was used, and so it was very easy for me to accept the position in Miraval, and then I went and I spent 2 years at Miraval as their mindfulness assistant manager, where we helped individuals learn about mindfulness, both practical, didactic practice like we're going to do, formal practices, informal practices, and how to weave that into their daily life and communications, eating, and behavior. And so hopefully by the time we're finished, you'll have these tools as well. But let's first just start. I mean, again, we talked about it, but now you've been here for almost 5 days. We're coming towards the end. And so now, rather than thinking of this as what brought you here, the same question that we had on the first day, but now, after these days, what do you feel is bringing you out there? What do you feel that you're going to take from what you've had here in these last few days? But I started with the story of the Buddha, and I gave you the meaning of the word Buddha, which means someone who knows. And the Buddha constantly said, everyone is a Buddha. Every one of you is someone who knows. You do know. You don't need someone else to tell you. You don't need someone to tell you what you should eat. You know what you should eat. You just choose not to try to do it. Whether because of habits, whether because of social tensions, regardless. And the fact that, yes, you can come here and these things are just a reminder. They just remind you of things. Yes, sometimes maybe they provide a context of clarity from a wording, vocabulary point of view that you can share with yourself and with other people. But at the core of it, especially for me with mindfulness, it's not that you don't know. It's not that you don't know. I might give you some tools, but once you have the tools, you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Right? I mean, how often did your parents try to tell you, hey, pay attention, like you said earlier, when you're walking, just look at the leaves, look at the world around you, right? Even though our parents do what we just said, you got in a car on your day off, and you ended up at work, even though you wanted to go to the beach. And then you turn around and go to the beach. Now, John Kabat-Zinn is a person I studied with. He built the Mindfulness Center in Boston, does a lot of work trying to take mindfulness towards the healing side of things. And he has a very beautiful definition, the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose. And that's important, you know, that you're choosing to pay attention in the present moment without judging, and you can, the unfolding events of moment by moment. Notice how he just uses more words to what we began by saying about Vipassana, learning to feel yourself and accept whatever is happening. Most of the time, most of us spend each day having a conversation with ourselves, but mindfulness is really the ability of actually listening. We talked the other day, whether you want to believe that or not, there are a lot of thoughts that go through your head every day. But if you really paid attention to those thoughts, you'd realize the other definition, truth behind that 95% of the thoughts you had yesterday are the same thoughts you have today. Most of us are just regurgitating the same stuff in our head, listening to that paying attention to information but not necessarily really listening. So mindfulness is very much like a mental exercise, which is much like a physical exercise for the body. And again, you will get this part. So really, what is mindfulness meditation? So we have two ways of thinking of mindful meditation. One of them is a formal way. A formal way is when you're choosing to take a specific set of time, be it 5 minutes, be it 1 minute, be it longer, be it like a retreat that we said. So a formal practice is you're going to take that time and you're going to devote that time to put into practice these two principles that I just gave you. Paying attention and accepting whatever is happening. Okay? So for 1 minute, I want you to sit with your feet flat on the floor. I'm going to put a timer, so it's 1 minute. And all I want you to do is to pay attention to your breathing. So close your eyes. And then the one thing I'm going to ask of you is don't fidget. Try not, for 1 minute, don't do anything with your body. Don't try to change your fingers. Don't try to change your stuff. So do whatever you need before you can sit with your feet flat, spine tall, as comfortable as you can. And for 1 minute, pay attention to your breathing. And anytime your body wants to do something, like maybe touch your hair, or scratch, or wiggle your fingers, you're going to pay attention to that desire that your body is trying to do, and accept that you're not going to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? Okay, so for 1 minute, I start the time now. You don't have to do anything with your breathing, but it will give you something to do with your mind. Bless you. And so you're paying attention to the breath, but you're noticing that you're not going to fidget. Which means that your mind automatically will also notice your body. You might have an itch, but you're not going to scratch it. You might feel like you want to adjust your seat, but you're going to accept it without needing to change it. And your breath. These two things go with you wherever you go. A formal practice is taking these two things, your body and your breath, and choosing to put your attention on them. And then accept whatever is happening. So if you're doing a formal mindfulness practice that is sitting, then you told yourself, I'm going to sit and pay attention to my body, my breath. And why are you fidgeting? Why are you scratching? That's a form of unawareness. I promise you that if you do a long 10, 15 or more, and you have an itch, it will go away. Itchiness, the desire to fidget, these are all games your mind is playing because you're training it to be present in the moment. Fidgeting is a form of escaping the moment. One of my teachers likes to point out that if you go to a mental institution, where people are crazy, but I'll not use that term now, but it was fun to bring it out. They walk around, they kind of move and they touch themselves a lot. It's a certain sense of giving themselves an assurance that they're actually here. Us as human beings feel like we're not as mentally disabled, but we're not even noticing how, well, wait a minute, your thoughts always running around in your head. These constant thinking is your own form of touching yourself, validating to yourself that you're here. Because remember, you're having the same thoughts yesterday, today. There's 5% of fresh thoughts. Why are you not paying attention to those? Why are you not immersed in these elements that you can have? Does that make sense? How does that resonate when I say this about thinking that is just a form of fidgeting, and fidgeting with the body is just a form of escaping the desire to be present in the moment? So a formal practice, whether it's like I gave you a sitting one, another formal practice is choosing to take walking as a formal practice. And then in that kind of a practice, you're just walking and you're paying attention to how your feet are, you're paying attention to what's going on in your body, and then again, you're using that as a form of a formal practice. Whether you're going to just walk around a room, and because there's too many chairs, I didn't want to make you do that, or whether you in a lot of other retreats environments, they're going to have what they call a labyrinth. It's basically just like a circle, and you go in and you go out, but in certain areas you feel like you're closer to the center, in other areas you're further away from the center. And so it's another form of walking meditation to help you notice what's going on, right? Another way of doing a formal practice is mindful eating. And we sometimes do that kind of formal practice here. And in that kind of a formal practice, you're choosing to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to be silent when I eat. So I'm not going to speak at all. Every time I take a bite, I'm going to put the utensil down and just chew. And when I chew, I'm going to try to chew at least 20 times. And we like to tell people, we'll try to sing happy birthday to me, and chew throughout the whole period of the song. And so now we took another way of doing a formal practice of mindfulness. Right? So I gave you 3 different formal practices that can easily be taken to the informal living experience. Right? What does it mean by informal? Informal is, well, I am at dinner with my friends and I want to be able to communicate. And so maybe you choose to chew and only talk after you swallow. Right? That would be taking the mindful formal practice and applying it in informally. Or when I'm walking to my office, or if I'm walking around the mall, if I'm walking around with my children, I'm just going to try to pay attention to my body walking and notice what happens. Right? Or an informal way of communication. I'm going to pay attention to my breath. I'm going to pay attention to my body. I'm going to do my best to be able to keep the same awareness I just gave you about sitting. And when I'm talking to a person, I'm going to notice, am I fidgeting? Am I conscious of my own breathing? Do I know when I inhale, when I exhale? Can I feel my body? And sometimes when we do these, because that's an informal practice, but sometimes we make it a little bit formal by taking 2 people and asking them to kind of notice these things, put that into action, and try to talk to each other. And what they notice very quickly is that when you really are paying attention to yourself, the other person feels like you're much more present, like you're much more listening to them. These make sense, these ways of connecting formal practice and informal practices? Right? How you take the simple idea of mindfulness, which is to pay attention to my body or my breath and accept whatever is happening. So if you're feeling a negative emotion, you're just accepting it. There's nothing to change. If you have a positive emotion, you're accepting it. There's nothing to change. A man fell out of an airplane one time, and fortunately he had a parachute. Unfortunately, the parachute wasn't packed correctly, so it did not open. Fortunately, there was a big stack of hay where he was going to land. Unfortunately, there was a pitchfork in the middle, standing upside down. Fortunately, he missed the pitchfork. Unfortunately, he also missed the haystack. Our life is a series of fortunate and unfortunate events. And your idea and desire to have only fortunate experiences is ridiculous. Impossible. It's not a balance. When your life is fortunate, embrace it, love it, dance with it. In those moments when life is unfortunate, remember to meditate. Come in, pay attention, calm yourself. No need to judge it. Mindfulness has a beautiful aspect today from understanding research on affecting the brain. So meditation reduces cortisol. Cortisol we talked a lot about. Cortisol is the stress hormone in the body. Cortisol is also, today we understand, is responsible for diseases in our old ages like Alzheimer's and other elements of the mental disorders. What's also very interesting is the 5 minutes of formal meditation, and that's true for any, but since we're talking about mindfulness, so if you do the 5 minutes formal practice of mindfulness, you're able to reduce your cortisol levels. So by doing a regular practice of 5 minutes a day can help monitor the capacity of your own internal hormonal system. Yesterday we saw the video with Amy Cuddy. She was talking about how they were looking at cortisol and testosterone as means of understanding what's going on, and how by having the capacity for power poses reduces cortisol. Today we're looking at capacity for meditation to affect our hormonal balance. We also saw that research shows us that the gray matter in the brain is not as reduced as for those people who don't include meditation. We have increased capacity for thickness in our cortex when we are engaged in mindfulness meditation, or any other meditations, but since we're in mindfulness. And remember what we said earlier about mindfulness meditation. It is a way of exercising the mind, the brain, like you're exercising the body. You can start at any time. If you feel like you lost it, you can come here and be reminded of it, but you can also remind yourself of it outside of this area and just do it, right? Like the Nike commercial. Meditators who practice for 5 years or more have a significantly larger volumes of gray matter in the hippocampus and the area crucial for memory and learning. For me, again, as I mentioned to you guys, for me the idea of mindfulness and yoga are synonymous. I remember at the age of 19 reading that yogis basically, and it's not that they lived longer, but they had a better quality of life when they were older, right? And so for me, it was more just like an experiment. Yoga, for me, the word yoga is the same as the word meditation. It's a way of learning to pay attention to your body. For those of you who've been to my classes, that's what I try to teach with you. The fact that we do movements and all that, but it's just a way of learning to be with the breath and be with the body in a period of time. And then yes, for me, it's the ability of then taking that same aspect and go out into the world. When I first came to yoga and understood that breathing, maybe I'm not aware of my breath and breath can be deeper, it was like, wait, I could pay attention to my breath when I'm in the car. I can pay attention to my breath when I'm walking. I can pay attention to my breath when I play rugby. Meaning the capacity of being with your breath is not taken away just because you play a sport or you sit in a classroom and you listen to a lecture.
That's being controlled.
The breath is there, it's always there. So it's like, it's not, I can be aware of it. Oh, I am breathing. We didn't say you have to change your breath, manipulate the breath, or control the breath. We just said we can be aware of it. Right? Mindfulness allows the body to have experience rooted in our body, to feel grounded, to know ourselves, to get an idea of who we are, to have a consciousness on what's going on in our body. Ways of understanding that we're not connected to the body is when we have obsessive thinking, when we're judging, when we have numbness, when we're rushing through, which are things that are just symptoms of what we said about fidgeting.